Just to give you all a heads up that we do record the sessions and we upload them to the YouTube channel within 2 days after the talk. So if you want to revisit or share with family and friends, we definitely invite you to do that.
Okay.
And hey, Marcia from Brooklyn, see you here. Well, we definitely welcome all of you. This is part 2 to our July 16th conversation on youth mental health during Black Lives Matter. So we were coming right off the heels of a very activist fueled summer, the month of June. So since we're coming towards the end of summer, these topics are becoming even more important as we all discuss what returning to school will look like for our youth in our community. So my name is Meredith, and I am the co-founder of Classroom Culture. I'm a New York native, but I'm based in DC. And Classroom Culture's bulk of programming surrounds conversation, speaking, sharing stories, researching, connecting professionals in education, and hoping that after these talks, you either leave informed, empowered, or find a way to connect with others who serve the same communities that you do to figure out how to do more work. So we're excited to have this today. Shannon's our moderator, and she has recruited a fantastic group of panelists who have a world of knowledge in the area of mental health with youth and in our communities and school. And we welcome all of you. So the normal requirements for Zooms, as always, I think we're all now can put Zoom engineer on our resumes, but asking that you mute yourselves. If you'd like to join the conversation, there's the raise the hand icon. You can type it in the chat room. You can unmute and jump in. Shannon's going to open the floor to attendees also. So the conversation isn't just for our panelists, but we really welcome everyone to be a part of it. Going to start with some brief introductions of our panelists. And we start with Shannon, who's the moderator in Baltimore. And today I think we're pretty Baltimore heavy, so you guys are representing Baltimore. And Shannon is the CEO and owner of Streamline Consulting Services, based out of Baltimore. And newly, I'm not sure if it's still newly appointed Director of Operations, Shannon, let us know, with Community Services for Shura, which is a vocational rehabilitation agency in Baltimore. Next up, we have Wesley, who is the innovator and the founder of the Nolita Project, also based in Baltimore. He's a mentor to youth in Baltimore communities. He's a graduate with a criminal justice degree and a fantastic full-time single parent of his younger brother. We have Brandi. Brandi has a degree in psychology and criminal justice and a certificate in crime scene investigation, which I'd love to hear more about, Brandi, another time. And she also works with the youth and has done some fantastic research on finding what the connection is between environmental factors and juvenile delinquency in Baltimore. Our new panelist this week, and we're happy to have you, Alexandria, is an early educator. She's teaching 4th grade in Baltimore City. And her goal as an educator is to figure out a way to have public schools have more inclusion that supports students who learn with varied learning styles. Coming from Brooklyn is Sonia. And Sonia is the owner of Soul Visions Wellness and is a licensed social worker with over 10 years experience. And she works in public school communities working with our youth. And Dr. Scott, who's joining us, but I think he's in transition in the car, so he's going to chime in when he can, but he is a staff psychologist in North Carolina with the Department of Juvenile Justice, and he works in the Youth Development Center and has also founded his own organization called Real Talk. So we welcome all of you, excited to have you. We are going to share resources in the chat while we're having the conversation. The resources are available, same as the video, 2 days after. And Shannon, I hand the mic to you.
Hello, everyone. And also we have Valerie Robinson on as a panelist, who is a director of PRP for a mental health program in Baltimore City, who also does a lot of community work that I've recently found out that she likes to do without being publicly acknowledged. So that's a beautiful thing, because some people do it for the likes and she does it because she loves to do it. So last month we had the opportunity to learn and discuss how Black Lives Matter, social media can cause secondary trauma in children and impact learning. So now that we talked about where trauma comes from, we also want to talk about how we can manage that stress with our students in a virtual environment and what that looks like in a virtual environment. How to deal with students who can't escape their trauma because of virtual learning, and how can teachers navigate the murky waters without physical interaction. So there are several challenges to teaching students who have been through some trauma. As a recap of part 1, which was an amazing conversation, and I still am getting a lot of positive feedback from it, what specific strategies do you suggest teachers use to identify students who experience trauma, and how would that work during virtual learning? So I'm going to start with Sonia first, since she's our school social worker. I'm going to start with her first, and I'm going to jump to Alex.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited about the conversation, the continuing conversation. When I think about strategies that I talk to our teachers about in the classroom, like if you're brick and mortar and you're in your classroom, I always tell them to be mindful of changes that they see with students. Like if you had a student who was in one space, like always engaged, always like really, like just really open and talking, and just even if it's not necessarily with you but with other students, and then you find that all of a sudden they're presenting in a very, very different way, or even if it's the flip of that, I tell them to look out for those kind of things. And I think that kind of still comes up virtually when you're thinking about changes that you may notice within a student's behavior, whether it's in the classroom or they're not showing up for classes, or even if it's a situation where you have students that are reaching out to you more than they normally would. Like we had a student who, before we logged off for the summer, who was reaching out to their advisor, the special education coordinator, the social worker much more often than normal. And so we knew that there was something going on in the home now that she was there more regularly that we needed to kind of like check in with. I think for teachers, sometimes that means that they have to take off their teacher hat and put on their human hat. Because in a lot of our schools, we are so focused on academics that it's hard for us to see the other things that are happening in the room. And so the number one thing that I would tell teachers to do specifically would be to take off your teacher hat for a second and be mindful of the human aspect of what's happening in your classroom, so that you can be able to recognize things that you may see or something that may be off.
Okay, Alex, same question. And thank you, Sonia. That was good. And I'm gonna pull in one of the points that you mentioned earlier about taking off the teacher hat. But Alex, go ahead.
I was kind of gonna go, similar to the taking off the teacher hat. Sometimes I think allowing yourself, you as the teacher, structuring sort of your day with your students around having that time to take off that teacher hat and just be a human being talking to another human being. Especially right now when, we are going to be the ones spending, as teachers, we'll be the ones spending a lot more time with them than we were like in previous months during the summer and things like that. So not making things so structured and so time consuming that the students don't feel that they can just communicate. Having that kind of built into your days or your weeks, however you kind of sort of have the ability to do so. But just the communication piece, having multiple ways of communicating with your students. I know for me, and this was just me being able to do this, but I would try to use, not just phone conversations or online things, but text or games or things like that, because I would find that those would be the things that would help me to get to know my students, what they like, what they're interested in, what they like to do on a daily basis. And even if that meant that we would have to kind of come up with okay, Ms. Rice, are you going to be available to talk or to play this game with me at this time? And that would lead us to conversations, just being able to chat freely and openly, but definitely allowing that time to be human, where you just have that time to talk to your students, building that into your sort of social emotional supports that you provide for your students.
So taking off the teacher hat to me is very important. Prior to this, we were having a conversation about children being unable to escape. So with this thrust upon us age of virtual learning, taking off the teacher hat, being able to become human, to talk to the students and see what's going on with them. In the brick and mortar classroom, it was easy if a child was abused or whatever, you could just go to the social worker, get the police involved. It was an easier process. Now, children are unable to remove themselves from these unhealthy environments. So how are some ways that teachers can navigate through this to help students in those situations? Because a lot of us were the saving grace for some kids. And how do you think children will be able to tell you what's going on when you have the person that is causing the trauma or the unhealthy environment, or you're unable to eat like you wanted to because you don't have food at home? Anything could happen. Anything that school was actually used as an escape from. How do you think teachers can help children navigate through those things? Wesley?
So for that question, since I have an unorthodox way of teaching anyway, I think some educators are going to have to take a higher step outside of what they're just doing every day. Some of us might have to see if it's okay to do home visits. I know some schools allow that, or you won't have to have one-on-ones outside of just the live. Because when you on an everyday screen with multiple students, when do he or she have the opportunity to pull you aside and say, hey, Miss Jones or Miss Brandi, such and such is going on with me at home or in my life? When will that opportunity be given when you have a student that don't have that outside way of pulling you to the side, or you taking them to the hallway, you taking them to the back of the classroom? Now we all online looking at each other. So how can she or he express themselves? I would say, sometimes we're going to have to do one-on-ones with the student. And outside of that, I'm not sure what are the guidelines for every school. I worked at some schools that allowed and doing, home visits. I know I used to go to home visits because some of my students didn't come to school, and we would go in the community or go get them students and pick them up. I've actually done these things, pick students up and make sure they got there because their attendance was very low. They didn't have a ride or things like that. So, making sure they got that. But it's about to be a whole new wave of educators trying to figure out what to do for these students. So I wouldn't say there is some type of guideline right now at this moment for us. What I will say is we need to all make sure we stay together and stick with one another so we can learn and converse with one another. Hey, what are you doing that works for your students? Or what are you doing that's working over there? Because not only for the students and the parents, but us as educators and community leaders, this is a new atmosphere for us as well. So I don't think a lot of us really even know how difficult this might be when the actual real school year starts up, when you have a child that is going through traumatic incidents at their home. So I'll give an example. One of my students, he is 13 years old. I'm sorry, she is 13 years old. Her mother works a full-time job, 2 jobs actually. Her mother has a 1-year-old baby. My 13-year-old student now is almost a mother at the age of 13, because if you call her, she has the baby. If you FaceTime her, she has this child. If she's outside walking up and down the block with the kids, she has the baby in the stroller. I know this because she's in my program and I do a lot of home visits with her, but it's almost like at the age of 13, she now has a 1-year-old child because her mother have to go in to work and she can't afford daycare services. So, me doing those home visits helps out a little bit, but of course I can't be there all day, every day to make sure this 13-year-old little girl is doing these things. But I make that example because a lot of educators are going to be faced with these issues, because even though he's older, another one of my students who is in the 10th grade, his mother has 3 children. and she also works outside. And he feels like, Mr. Hawkins, I want to run away. And I talk to him daily because he feels like he can't do anything as a young man because he is now raising his 3 siblings because his mother has to go to work. So from the morning to nighttime, he has his siblings because she sleep at night and during the day, she's at work. So he's like, Mr. Hawkins, I feel like I don't have a life. I love my siblings, but I don't want to live here no more. So I'm constantly talking him and walking him through these incidents every single day. He's calling me frustrated, crying, asking me what to do. I've walked him through FaceTimes of cooking meals and all type of stuff. So I'll just give these 2 examples because I know educators are going to be faced with so many different incidents that you could be online and a child does something and the mother or father reach and slap them or like do something that you might not even think is about to happen, right? Or they could be digging in something or doing something that is dangerous to their lifestyle. How do you stop them from doing that through a live? So, for me, I think it's almost like we're going to have unorthodox approaches to this and really work together. That's my response.
Valerie, just to piggyback off of what he said, can you answer the question, and can you also touch on how there are older siblings in the house who are taking care of their younger siblings, how that impacts them, and then with the stress of trying to learn at home and being a parent at the same time?
Well, the biggest issue, I believe, is basically these children are being parentified. So I have definitely been, I used to work for Baltimore City DSS in foster care. So I've definitely been in situations, well, even as a therapist, a mental health therapist in the community, I will go out and, like Wesley said, they'll be as young as 10 years old and they have to take care of their 2- and 3-year-old siblings. And so it's difficult. It's definitely difficult to try to reach them because one of the things that people have to realize what trauma means. Trauma, of course, you can go ahead and put a whole bunch of stuff around it. But basically, trauma means that you can't trust, the world is unsafe, and they feel powerless. So how can you really get to those people? That's why I applaud teachers so much, because as a mental health professional, I go in, I do what I do, and I say what I say, and I leave. But teachers, y'all are in there with them for 6-7 hours a day. And of course, not to say it like minimizing the mental health profession, because we're definitely inundated with what they're doing if you genuinely care. But you all have a whole nother platform that I can't imagine even doing. I've been a school social worker before, and even that was a little rough. But yet, excuse me, it's almost like you have to look at where they are. You really have to meet people where they are, because they do feel powerless. They do feel like, okay, well, I have nothing left. All I have is I have to look after my younger siblings because of whatever. So you telling me I have to do all of this and learn? Get out of here. So it's definitely hard. And unfortunately, all I can really provide as a mental health provider is just like warning signs of what abuse looks like, of what trauma looks like. I mean, I know this isn't really in your question, but
that's fine. Go ahead.
Okay,
I like it.
But this isn't in your question. But I feel like there are 4 signs. There's the suspicious injury. Now all of a sudden, like you said, you got a knot in the side of your head. Somatic complaints. They always complain about their arm, their back, or their stomach, or something like that. Behavior presentation is just, of course, children are going to be antsy and they're going to be hyperactive. But if you really know that child, once you really get to know them, they're like, something's a little up with them. Their affect is low. There's something going on that's outside of their behavior. And of course, if you see that hand coming out, or that controlling parent, or that, that kind of thing, it's hard for me to say this, and I'm just going to be 100% real. Shannon brought me on here because I've definitely worked on both sides of the fence. And I've worked for Baltimore City DSS, and I know that may not be the best situation, but sometimes you can't view everything. You can't burn yourself out you got to call CPS. Call them. Because I tell even the clients that I see now, I said, let me see you. You know, they say, Ms. Val, you know, they put it up on the, you know, I know teachers, I know with my children, I have 3 children, they make them turn their cameras on, because actually 80% of CPS calls comes from schools. And it scares me half to death, because these children are really, really, really about to be in a terrible situation, feeling powerless, feeling hopeless, feeling like who is going, and like, again, if your abuser is sitting right here next to you, and that is, you know, the devil, you know, is what you're going to stay with, then it's difficult. It's definitely difficult. So I just tell people at the end of the day, all you can do is teach. I mean, not all you can do is teach, but that is your priority, is teaching. Of course you want to be there. Of course you want to advocate, but you can't kick the door down and save everybody. Have the people that are there to call CPS, even if it's just or even call the police, call BCRI, Baltimore Crisis Response. Get them over there just to have an adult or somebody else knock on a door and do a wellness check. I have done that plenty of, and the wellness check, that doesn't mean nobody's going to jail or anything. BCRI, I say BCRI, Baltimore Crisis Response, because I know calling the police isn't the best thing you know, at all. But definitely call BCRI and call CPS if you feel like there's some warning signs or some triggers that's constantly there.
Thank you, Valerie. And that leads us into my next question, gauging the classroom, because you do, as teachers, and I remember being a teacher, and I had to call CPS on a parent because a little girl came to school, and I mean, she was black and blue and green all over the place. And it's, again, it's easy when you just eyeball, but Dr. Scott, I want you to jump in if you can. How do you gauge the temperature of a class when it's virtual? You have all the little screens up and all the little pictures on your laptop, and you're looking at the students, and you are trying to figure out what's going on, because you're trying to gauge the class for those students who need to be removed from unhealthy environments, but you're also trying to gauge the class from those students who have never experienced a pandemic before, who've never experienced their parents being unemployed before, and they're dealing with that stress at home. Because even with, like in my situation, I haven't been off work yet. My daughter has been blessed that I have not been off work. But there are so many more parents who are used to being in that $75,000 to $100,000 price point, who are now unemployed and are facing eviction, and are facing car repossession and have garnishments, and they are not the happiest people to be around at home. So how do teachers gauge that type of environment as well in this virtual learning environment? And if you could, Dr. Jamal, you can jump in, and all those analysts who gave us some great strategies, y'all can put them in the chat too.
I mean, I would just speaking from a psychologist standpoint. Before I start any group, I generally do an icebreaker. There's a tool I do. It's basically music therapy, where depending on what's going on or what mood I'm in or what vibe I have, I'll just pick a song, and you know, I'll play like maybe like a minute and a half of that song, just to get a sense of like, what did that song make you feel like, or what were you thinking, or what are you feeling? So if there's like, you know, I work in a prison, so for example, there's a song by A Boogie with the Hoodie. I feel really silly being my age saying that name, but he has a song called Jungle, and the song just like, you could play like a minute and a half of it, and you get all of these reactions. You get all of these responses. So I'm thinking, as far as a classroom goes, having something light just doing something where you're just doing a quick check-in. You know, where's your mood at? With 1 being like, I'm not feeling great, and 10 being like, I feel amazing, you know? So there's different ways. I'm thinking about another technique that we use is called a SOS. You just do it's just slow down, orient, and then do a self-check. And depending on how big or small your classroom is, but what you do is, you know, you just have everybody close their eyes, take deep breath in through your nose, slow breath out through your mouth. You know, today is Thursday. It's about 5:33 p.m. Yes, you know, you're about to do such and such class. You're safe, and then you just do a self check. You know, you get your level of stress, but also your level of control over that stress. You know, because just because you're stressed out doesn't give you the right not to have control. And so if a kid is like, you know, my level of stress is 7, but my level of control over that stress is 2, then, you know, they're stressed out, but at least they have control over it. But if a kid is like, I'm at 8 and 9, my level of stress is 9, and my level of control is like 8, I don't have control over it, then that's a way of like getting a gauge of what's going on, you know. And then if you feel the need as a teacher after class to reach out to that kid, either DM that kid or whatever, then that's a way of going about it. Like listening to the panelists, I know as a psychologist we got boundaries that we have to keep, but I don't know if those hold the same for teachers. Like I know I can't necessarily just pop up to a kid house or slide in a kid's DMs on Instagram, but I don't know if teachers are bound in the same way. So I was curious about how the boundary piece works as far as educators go.
Sonia, I was actually about to call on you too. That's why you unmuted your mic.
Yeah, because that's what I was thinking too. Like as a school social worker, well, within my school's network, it is expected that teachers will share their personal numbers, or that they will get a Google Voice number so that they can be able to talk to students outside of school time. So in the event that Tim needs help with his math homework, he can like take a picture of his math homework, what he's done so far, message it to his teacher, and then the teacher can be able to help him through text. Or I've seen college trips where students are working on essays and they're Skyping with their teacher. I don't necessarily fall into that category because there's just, as Dr. Scott mentioned, there's just too much space for something to go horribly wrong, where you can put yourself and your license in jeopardy. And so one thing that I was thinking in terms of strategies as well is like creating more touch points. And I had to really think out of the box when we went virtual and when we went to, when school logged off. I was thinking to myself, like, there's so many kids that I'm concerned about, but I can't just be like, here's my phone number, call me after school or call me over the break. So I created a unofficial social work counseling office Facebook page that I put out for myself. And I reached out to every social worker that I had worked with at my school, those who are still no longer a part of the school as well. And we're all admins on the page. And we put like, this is not for services. This is not for any kind of like counseling to actually happen, but we send out resources, and we've been sending out resources since school was about to end, all the way up to, we're gonna keep the page throughout the school year as well, because just as somebody mentioned, if a student is in a space where it's unsafe and they're in the room, like I saw lots of posts about women who were in DV situations, how they can be able to let their therapist know during a call that, you know, that there's a possibility that the situation has become extremely unsafe, so that somebody could get 911 involved. I've done wellness checks over the last couple of months, but for students, they may not necessarily be able to do that or feel comfortable being able to do that during the course of the class when it's happening, because we have had parents actually in the room when some of that stuff is happening. to tell some students and some parents like, hey, when he's getting counseling services, he's actually supposed to be by himself. This is the time just for him, and have to ask respectfully for them to remove themselves. But if they're just on Facebook on their phone, maybe that parent might not notice, and they can be able to send a message to say, hey, I need more information about these resources, or giving them information about NYC Well, where they can text, chat, or call to get assistance. Just always maintaining that there's a certain boundary that we can't cross because of our licenses and our scope and limitations, that because we work in the school that we can't, go beyond that. So it's a balancing act for sure. But if you think outside of the box, I think that you can be able to make it happen.
Okay, we have a quick question from Marsha, and then I'm gonna shoot over to Brandi.
Hi, sorry I can't put my face out. I'm middle of cooking. I had a question about like the way like what Sonia was saying and everyone else was saying about, like how do you support the student after the fact, and like the boundaries, which is really hard. And I was thinking about the reverse too, like how does that work for teachers as well? I know I've had that experience as an educator where, because it's confidential. You can't just, as a social worker or therapist, just say, hey, so-and-so is going through this, and that's not something that was supposed to be shared. But then I've seen an experience where I had no idea about anything at all, and I could potentially harm a student somehow with my behavior because I didn't know. And then sometimes, students, I teach middle school, and they get real, aggy sometimes. And if they treat you differently because they feel like you're not supporting them. But the truth is, I don't know anything. And so we had to, I guess I had to talk to the counselor, like, hey, I know things are confidential, but what is the protocol for letting us know as a grade team about a particular student who's high risk with whatever that we can support without dishing out information that's confidential. So I wondered how, what are ways that social workers have approached teachers in schools about how to, hey, heads up kind of thing without, invading a student's privacy.
Valerie or Sonia, y'all could answer that question.
One thing that I do, regardless, it doesn't matter how big or how small whatever the concern is that the student may have, before they leave my office and before we get off of a Zoom, I always ask them if there's a specific teacher that they feel comfortable being aware of what's going on, or are they comfortable with me saying, and I would literally write verbatim what I'm going to put in the email, and say this is exactly what they'll know. And if they're I'm only comfortable with them knowing this much, that's all I send. As far as a message to the grade team, if that student is in a space of when we're in the building, if it's a situation where the student is had a really rough morning and I know that that's going to play out where they potentially could get sent out, I'll say to the student hey, if I let your teachers know that you've had a rough morning, we don't have to go into exactly what's happened. Is it possible that I can send that out to your grade team? Because then there's the possibility that they won't cold call on you. They'll give you enough space. Maybe you could be able to sit in a separate area in the back of a class. And the same things can be done over virtual. They will cold call students virtually. So I can be able to negotiate different ways that they can receive support without the teacher having to know the entire situation and still respect their confidentiality. And so I think it just depends upon the student and how much they're willing to share, but you can be able to say, hey, I just need you to give them a little TLC, or to give them some space. If you notice that there's something going on, feel free to email me. I'll swing by the class and I'll go have a conversation with them just to see what's going on, if the teacher wants to be able to support in that way.
Valerie?
100%. Definitely, you have to be transparent with the client and say, hey, I know I'm very transparent. They know my stuff is confidential except for 3 things: suicide, homicide, and abuse. Other than that, everything is confidential. But she was saying, even if it's something generic, hey, they having a rough day today. That's all I would say. I wouldn't like you said, you can't get into all the inner workings of everything. You can just say something flat. Well, not you, us as the social workers would just say something flat. Or if the teacher has a question, hey, you mind talking to so-and-so about such and such, blah, 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 we'll definitely be open to just have a flat out general conversation. Of course, we can't get into too deep because we have to think about our license and we have to get different ROIs, release the information from teachers and well, not from teachers, from their parent and everything else like that. So it's only so much we can do, but we can definitely, I saw it in the chat, but basically teachers and social workers, everybody in that building, the principal down to the cafeteria ladies to the everybody needs to come together and really, well, you know, I guess it's different now, but everybody definitely needs to come together so that we can really help these kids and parents.
And I think you use your clinical judgment too. Like if you feel like a teacher's asking a question to be nosy, then nah, I ain't telling you nothing. But if I can give enough information with painting a picture without necessarily violating this young man or the young lady's confidentiality, and it's gonna benefit that student, if that teacher has a modicum of information, then, you know, I just kind of use my clinical judgment and weigh that out. I mean, it's a little different, like working with teachers in a prison because everything's just kind of available for the most part. But these teachers don't be having time to be reading through 30-something kids' criminal files and all of that. So there'll be stuff that happens and they just don't know why. So you just try to weigh it out, use your clinical judgment, and go from there.
I think that's a really great point. And I didn't think about that, but sometimes what'll end up happening, I'll have that conversation with teachers and I'll let them know like, hey, so I can't really get into the ins and outs of it, but I will be definitely sure to let you know of ways that you can specifically support this student if something comes up. Because sometimes the teacher will come with a concern and then they'll come back because they want to hear whatever happened. And I'm like, I can't really tell you, but I'll let them know, like, if there's any way that you can support them, I will be sure to let you know. So you could kind of like let them down gently because sometimes they are just curious.
I just muted myself. Thank you so much, guys. We have another question, but I'm gonna shoot to this first question, this other question that I wrote out first. And this is really, I know that most of the students in the United States are not of African American descent. However, we know that most African American children's teachers are of Eurocentric descent. So in this new age of this pandemic where everyone has some sort of trauma, whether it's been there before or after, because this has been a traumatic event for all of us. And how do you think that navigating through the trauma that some of these kids already had, down to this trauma of living through a pandemic, not being able to see your family, again, parents being laid off, it's just a lot. Crime rate is going to skyrocket because there are people that are broke now that have never been broke before. And before you know it, Peter and Paul are going to be robbing each other and everybody else because we got to survive at this point. And right now it looks like even with the unemployment bump up going back down, that's going to cause an issue too. So with all of that being said, how do you think that, and for my teachers, I'm sure you've heard this phrase millions of times, or this term, culturally responsive teaching, how do you think this is going to play a role, culturally relevant teaching, culturally relevant instruction? How do you think this is going to play a role to help ease some symptoms of trauma in the classroom so kids can learn, and to give them more of a safe space to come forward if there's any trauma? Because even though I may not have been a victim of child abuse 5 months ago, there's now a pandemic and my parents are stressed out. So we don't know how they're going to react. So how do you think just being more culturally responsible and more culturally aware, more culturally relevant is going to help ease those symptoms of trauma? Brandi?
That's so funny. I unmuted myself. I think, one, it's been said a few times before we got to this question, but teachers are gonna have to take off the teaching hat and be human. I think that teachers are probably likely going to have to ask their students, maybe one-on-one or as a class exercise, and they just get it back, but to ask the student, what are triggers for you? I think that comes with communication. And if you understand, or if you have absorbed what might be a trigger for this kid, you know what to avoid, how to attack it when that comes up. I think in the book, the 7 effective habits of highly effective people. He talks about how there's a time that there's a young lady in a hospital bed. She keeps spazzing out at night. He doesn't, the doctors are like, they keep calling this psychiatrist. Somebody explain to us what's wrong. She does this every night when we go in there to give her medicine. And then as you go deeper into it, she was a victim of gang rape. So her waking up in the middle of the night to see men surrounding her bed, that's a trigger for her. If they understood, one, what was even her issue, then they would have understood the trigger. Maybe the lights would have been on. Maybe they would have sent 3 women and 1 male, you know? So I think teachers are gonna have to ask their students, what are triggers for one? I also think that teachers are gonna have to take their blinders off and look for the student who has no brakes. And by that, I mean, just to get a little technical here, and I'll break it down more, but in relation to how the brain works, your hypothalamus is your command center, and it's going to communicate with your body through your autonomic nervous system. Your autonomic nervous system controls things like your ambulatory functions, such as your heartbeat, heart rate, blood pressure. That autonomic nervous system has 2 components. You have your sympathetic and your parasympathetic. So to put that in like straight context of making sure you look for the student with no brakes, I'm assuming everybody knows how vehicles work. So let's say you, the person, are the hypothalamus, you are the command center. So when you go to get in that car, you have to tell that car when to go, when to stop, when to turn right, when to turn left. Your autonomic nervous system is how your hypothalamus communicates with your body. So let's say that's the key, right? So now we have our command center and we put in the key in the car to start our car. We have our sympathetic nervous system, which is going to be our our gas pedal. That is our fight or flight. Then you have your parasympathetic, which is your brake. That's your rest and digest. And if we know anything about cars, if your car is not serviced, if your brakes run down, eventually that car is going to always be in go mode. I think this is an assumption, but I think we've all seen a car speed by us and we were like, where are they going? Like, why have they not slowed down? That's going to be that kid who's affected by trauma. That kid is going to constantly be in go mode of fight or flight. They don't have the skill set. They don't have basically they don't have the skill set, or they haven't been provided tools or best practices to deal with that. And that is something that unfortunately teachers are going to have to deal with, and they're going to have to gauge that. I know that's going to be tough because it's hard sometimes to read somebody through a screen. It's going to be very hard to read that through a screen. So for instance, I told a friend who's on this call right now that today I was having probably one of the worst days, right? And you guys wouldn't engage that. You wouldn't engage that. Like even the beginning of this, Shani, you asked me how I was and I said, I'm doing good, you know? So even that being said, it's hard to read that. So it's going to be hard to gauge that, but you're going to have to be more than just the teacher. You're going to have to do more than just the lesson. You're going to, unfortunately, or fortunately, however you choose to look at it, you're going to have to be the therapist. And like Valerie said, I think one, if you feel like you need to, you should call CPS because there's also secondary trauma. And if you're teaching 2 kids, 10 kids, or 5 kids, or however many it is, I mean, it could be 1 kid, and you become so consumed, you're going to eventually start digesting that. Or this kid was acting this way, or this kid had this particular bruise. I need to get to the bottom of this. I need to figure out, and now you can't sleep because you're concerned that when you were in a physical establishment, that kid could have stepped away from what they were dealing with in their home life. and now they can't. And now you're up wrecking your brain trying to figure out what new tools I can put in place to figure this out. Like Sonia said, you know, with the Facebook, that's an awesome way. So teachers are going to have to become super unconventional, as if they already haven't. But Wesley said this earlier, you're going to have to be unorthodox in your teaching, especially now moving into the next school year, because we already know with COVID, it was kind of here, this is it, figure it out, do your best. Now we're, 8 months into the year, school's getting ready to start again. There was time in between the end of the school year and the start of the new 2020-2021 academic year to come up with practices or tools or things of that sort. So people are going to have to become unorthodox, and they're going to have to start the school year off like that.
I had to take myself off of you. Thank you, Brandi. Oh my goodness. One person, this really, really smart, amazing man that I know, he told me that, you know, when someone knows something, when they can break it down real simply. I would have never compared any nervous systems to a car, but I got it now. Like, I understand but honestly, I understand it now. It's like, oh, okay, so I'm driving a car and you said parasympathetic and somebody else sympathetic, but I know that my fight or flight is my gas. And if I don't have the skill set to press the brake, I'm always going to be going. And a lot of our children, because now of this pandemic, they don't have the skill set to press the brake. So thank you for breaking it down that way. I do have a question from the chat. I told her I would ask it, so I'm looking for it. Okay, do you also have any suggestions on how to protect students' confidentiality in regards to the space they are doing their virtual learning? This particular teacher, Kaya, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, she's had discussions with parents regarding this, but has been challenging translating the importance of privacy and confidentiality, especially during groups. Wesley, that one's on you, sir, because you do a lot right now. So go ahead. Well, everybody does, but I'm gonna let you talk.
Say it one more time.
How do you work with parents to understand confidentiality of their students or their children while they're doing these group Zooms, and just getting parents to understand the importance of privacy? And let me get back to it.
So when I'm working with my students, unless it's something that's detrimental or can cause harm to them, I kind of keep it between me and the child. If it's something that I feel like I need to report it to the parent, I also relay the message and let the parent know that dealing with this in a specific a certain way, don't have the child to shut down, because having that open line of communication is very strong and is needed in our communities and in our schools. So a lot of the times when you don't have that strong line of communication and the child shuts down and they feel like they have nobody to talk to, then now they're trying to figure out on their own, or they're trying to deal with the situation with their siblings or their peers, which is not going to be able to help them navigate through these situations. And that's why a lot of them end up in a worse condition or situation than they could have been. And I like to talk to my parents all the time and teach them and talk to them and allow them to grow these relationships and these bonds with their child. Because honestly, the reason why a lot of these children and these students and scholars learn about sex from videos, or learn about sex from the street, or learn about sex from their fellow classmates, is because the parents are not having the conversation with their children. And then the children don't feel comfortable with talking to their mother or their father about it. A lot of the times, the first time a lot of the students that I work with, they've had their first drug or alcoholic experience with people that they shouldn't have had it with. A lot of the young girls that I've dealt with then had older men, do certain things to them that shouldn't have happened, because she didn't feel comfortable or okay being able to talk to her mother about this. And the mothers sometimes not knowing that they making that child shut down. So it's not about being your child's friend. It's about learning and understanding how to have that strong, open line of communication, so your son or your daughter or your niece or your nephew can feel okay and comfortable with talking to you about these things. So I would say with my scholars, they tell me everything under the sun, because one, I make them feel comfortable. Two, I teach them about what's going on. So if they saying something to me that I know is not right, I'm gonna talk to them first, and then I'm gonna let them know, like, look, this is not okay, and we're gonna have to deal with it with your parents or your guardian because it's not okay. And I break it down to them why it's not okay and how it could harm them. I don't make them feel alienated and then run to the parent and then bash them about it, because then they will never talk to you about nothing else again. And they're gonna break down, Mr. Hawkins, I thought I could trust you. Mr. Hawkins, I thought I could talk to you. Mr. Hawkins, I thought this. And then now I don't have that line of communication. The parent don't have the line of communication, and they just out here trying to navigate it for themselves. So what I say is we have to make sure we have a strong line of communication with our youth so they can feel comfortable with telling us things, with opening up and having these discussions. But everybody don't know how to do that. I deal with a lot of parents that they call their daughters and sons freaks or hoes, or you just fast, or you hot in the ass. And now the young girl don't feel comfortable with saying things to the mom or the dad and stuff like that. And sometimes last year, one school I was teaching at, and I want to give this quick example really quick, because I know we're getting short on time. And I want to hear what some of my educators had dealt with this. So what I have in my classes are called healing circles. And I build a space where they feel comfortable with talking, and my students talk. So I had one young girl, she was in the 8th grade. And she said, Mr. Hawkins, I just saw my big brother on Thanksgiving, and I don't know how I feel. So I'm like, what's wrong? He just, came home from prison, or he was in the military or something. And she was like, no, my dad and my brother moved out, but my mom and dad are still together. So it was like she was trying to talk to me, but she was afraid to really open up. So I didn't pressure her. And I said, okay, well, why do you feel like weird or strange or uncomfortable? And she was like, well, my brother touched me when I was young, and my dad found out, so they moved out. So instantly I'm like, oh man, she done already told me now, and it's like certain things we feel like, not just feel like we mandated to say anything. So I checked the guidelines and stuff first, because I'm like, well, he's not living there, and it didn't just happen now. So I got my advisors and stuff like that to how to deal with it. So I had a parent-teacher conference, and the father was like, he broke down in tears, and he was like, he said, Mr. Hawkins, how would you feel if you had a son and a daughter, and your son is away, he's in college, he's doing good, he's doing great, but you have your daughter as well, and this happened between your kids? He said, how do you pick between your children of how to deal with this situation? And he's like crying, he's upset, he's like begging me, he's like, please. He said, I've done everything to my life and alter my life to try to keep my family together. He said, I paid for 2 houses to keep my kids apart. He said, please don't report it. And it's like, it was such a hard thing to deal with, because I understood where the father was coming from with trying to save his son and his daughter, but the daughter needed therapy, and she was going through so much, but they felt like if they couldn't take her to therapy, because now this exposed this large issue that they face with in their home and in their family. But the mother and father still married. The father lived in an apartment with his son. His son is in freshman in college. The daughter lived with the mother, but they still in this marriage, and the wife and the husband still trying to figure their life out. But the little girl needs help. Like she's like really emotional. She's broken. It's a lot. So for me, it was so hard to deal with. And something like that, a lot of times from me being a young, male and a young Black male, I learned that there's a lot of students, especially a lot of young girls, who have been molested or touched by somebody in that community, by somebody in their family, or somebody close to them, but they can't speak on it, or they don't feel comfortable, or they can't open up because of it was their uncle, or it was their neighbor, or it was their big brother, or it was their cousin, or it was their mother's boyfriend, and things like that. And it really touched me. And I had to slow down on my healing circles for a while, because so many students was coming to me about stuff that the principal was like, Mr. Hawkins, we not equipped to deal with this.
Yeah, and that brings up the point of what Valerie said earlier about calling, like, you can't do everything on your own. And I think Sonia talked about it, Dr. Scott, Brandi, Alex, like as teachers, and I say we because when I was a teacher, I did the same thing. We take on so much of our students that it takes so much out of us that we can't effectively be there for everybody else. And we can't do that. There's a lot of questions in chat. Thank you, Wesley, for sharing that, because that actually goes into a question that a few people had in the chat, is that, don't want to say her name wrong, Jara. How you say her name, Brandi?
Hi, it's Jara.
Jara, okay, cool. So it's a lot of questions in the chat about identifying triggers for kids. Like one person asked about Dana, about her K1 kids are all living at home with daily trauma, but they respond with aggression to almost every trigger. And another teacher asked the same question. How do we identify triggers, not just identify triggers, but also help students cope with those emotions, teach them how to understand what triggers are? Because even though we are teachers or mental health professionals and they try to keep it separated, like it's not one and the same, we know that as teachers, sometimes you have to put on that therapy hat in order to get to the kids so they can understand some things. So how do we identify triggers in kids? How do we let them know what triggers are? And how do we give them the space to cope with those emotions so that they can move forward? Because now there's going to be a lot more kids dealing with more triggers and more trauma because of this pandemic, because of not being able to leave home where your abuser is, or the person that is yelling, because emotional abuse is still abuse, that's yelling and screaming at you, and you got the lights on, you running up the electricity bill. How do we help children, even those small ones, understand what's going on with them and how to cope with it? Miss Sonia and then Alex, and then I'm gonna call on a couple people so we can discuss the abuse thing, because that's serious. So Jara, you might be picked, you might be called on.
Not me. I was going to ask if y'all want to add some stats and some resources, so just let me know.
Yes, ma'am, I definitely will. Sonia?
I was going to say, somebody else asked a question afterward that I think speaks to that question. And is there a way to incorporate some psycho ed into lesson plans? And I think that is a great question, because like in science, you're in biology class, can we not talk about how we are physically responding to being triggered? A lot of times when I'm meeting in sessions with students, and I find that, again, I work with high school students, you're talking to a 13, 14, sometimes 16, 17-year-old freshman, they have no clue what's in their IEP. They don't know what their goals are. And so I find myself in the first few sessions talking a lot about what their specific needs are, how they respond to certain things. And so talking about triggers is something that will come up, and we talk about, well, how do you even know that you're being triggered? Like, what is your body's physical response to that? And I think giving kids that opportunity to kind of like name that is really important, because they know they know they tight, they know they getting hot, they know all this stuff, but they don't know what that means. And if we give it a space for them to kind of like understand that piece, then they can be able to verbalize to us, I'm feeling a little triggered right now. I didn't know what it was, but I felt myself getting really flushed. I felt myself, my heart rate went up. I felt all of a sudden my hand started to ball into a fist. And I think if you give them real life opportunity to say, this is what this looks like, this is what this may feel like for you, or I'll have them go back, because that might not be what that looks like for them. I say, well, when this was going on, did you notice anything about yourself? I started to feel like I was retreating. I just completely stopped talking, or I wanted to like just run out of the room, and like things like that. I'm really mindful of trying to have those kinds of conversations, because honestly, I can't expect them to utilize any service that I provide if they don't even know when they need me. And so having that conversation first is super important, so that they can be able to just get to the space where they can say, you know what, I think I need to go and speak to Miss Sears. Like, I'll have students have laminated sticky notes that they keep with them, and they'll just put it on the desk when they start to feel triggered within a class time. And then they'll be able to say, okay, I need to go. The teacher knows, because I would have had that conversation where they're able to say, I need to go speak to Miss Sears, but they can't even get to that spot if they don't even know that they're triggered in the first place. So you have to make it very plain for them so that they can. Hey, boo. But that's my answer.
Sorry.
Don't worry about it.
He was trying to add his book.
Alex?
Yeah, so several things that kind of came to mind. When moons ago, I was an early childhood mental health consultant. And so one of the first things that I would have to do when coming into a classroom, early childhood classroom, where, just to assess the environment, right? To kind of see if we got a call from a child care provider about a child that they felt like was expressing very aggressive behaviors and things like that. And they just didn't know how to support that child or what to do, what resources to provide, what accommodations to make in their environment. We would have to assess the environment to see, are there things that are taking place right now in this classroom that, like you said, could be triggers, but even not knowing what a trigger is, but is this a emotionally competent or emotionally supportive environment where children here know how to identify, what to say, where to go? Do you have areas in your environment where, and now this is in a classroom setting, do you have areas in your environment that supports that child that just needs a break? Is that allowed? Do you make allowances for children to say, I need a break, I need time out, I can't do this right now? Or have you supported children in being able to say, I need a break at this moment? That this very moment, what we're doing, I can't do it and I need a break. Not at a timeout, I need hands off. So we would look at the environment to see if those types of things are in place. So now come to where we are right now with virtual learning. A few things that came to mind were even things to do with younger children, but what does anger, what does frustration, what does an intolerance to something, what does that look like in you? But how do you, and labeling that, right? So how do you say that this is anger in me? So with young kids, we used to do things like social stories or, acting out different scenarios where kids could say, yeah, I feel like that sometimes, or that might make me feel X, Y, and Z. And that's something for older kids, that's something that I would do sometimes, would just be coming up with different scenarios, and having them sort of role play with me. What, if you were in this situation, how would you feel? What does this look like for you? How would you express it? Because at my school, we were one of the schools a few years ago, but a few years ago, that we started implementing mindfulness and doing different techniques with different yoga and things like that. But the thing that was bothersome to me about how we started to use it at my school was that it went from being able to teach children about mindfulness and what to do when they are not sure what they're feeling and how to kind of stop themselves, to being like a behavior management. So like, oh, you've done this, so now go to the mindfulness room. No, that's not at all what this is supposed to be. This is supposed to be when I'm in the moment. How are we teaching children who are in the moment what to do with what you're feeling and how to move through that, right? Not after the fact, when you've already threw the table, well, you've already thrown the desk. So we're past that part. Now, what do we do when you're feeling like I'm about to throw the desk? But what that means is that teachers, we have to know, we have to have a rapport, a relationship, and know our students, and being able to communicate, not just that this is a safe space, but that it's actually possible to do things when you're angry. It's actually possible to come up with ways for us to display that and move forward, and it not be, you not be penalized. You're not, because you're human, you will feel this way. These things happen, but actually building into your day-to-day instruction, and I mean day-to-day, consistently reinforcing that you can get through these moments, that maybe having an opportunity to tap out. Like when we were in class, I would have, for certain students that I knew were easily triggered by certain things, there would be things I would have to do in advance to prepare for that I know that this type of assignment might present some challenges. So there are certain things I need to do with that student ahead of time to prepare them for what they're about to experience, because no one likes to be thrown into anything. And especially a student that is learning to manage those sorts of things and, you know, express them appropriately, preparing them for that. So having conversations in advance. This is what tomorrow's day is going to look like. These are the things that we're going to have to do. Things of that nature just kind of came to mind about being proactive. So if you know these things about your students, that put those things in place ahead of time to support that student that you know is going to have a fit or is going to experience some anxiety about this task or what we're going to do the next day or in the next hour.
Thanks, Alex.
Can I jump in real quick?
Yeah, go ahead.
I know that we're talking about the kids and stuff, and one of the things that I think is important is that if the teachers don't know their own triggers, they're not going to recognize what is triggering this kid. I have a few people that I know that are teachers, and they might have had that one kid and they like, oh, I just don't feel like dealing with this and da-da-da. And it's like, oh, now you're having a bad day because why is this kid triggering? Now you're so triggered by this kid's action, you don't even realize that this kid is even triggered to begin with. So if you yourself, what we're teaching, you know, want to teach or introduce like psych into curriculums, and, you know, I dropped in the chat, we need to introduce trauma-informed into curriculums, but that also has to go both ways. The teachers need to also be aware of their traumas and best practices for them before really trying to guide kids through mindfulness, like Alexandria said. And I think that that is dope to even have that in a classroom setting. I think that that is so dope to do, especially with younger kids. And like she said, the consistency has to be daily. Consistency breeds habits.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I mean,
it's going to be up and down.
When Jamal, tell Nikki stop.
Sorry.
When I do trainings with my staff on behavior, what is it called now? Behavior principles and strategies. One of the things that we discuss are our own personal triggers. What triggers you? Because that's how if we can't manage our own triggers, how can we help assist someone with managing their own? So I know we talked a lot about just the different, just everything as far as trauma, how that translates as far as students and being able to be the student safe place. One of the things I did want to talk to Jara. Oh my God,
you can call me Jay. My friends call me Jay.
Your name. I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
She does, and I found this out in the chat, she does a lot of work with child abuse. And
yeah,
there's some strategies you can give our teachers just so they can have some more information on identifying them?
Sure. So just some quick stats I think will be helpful. I'm a child trafficking advocate, so I work with child trafficking victims and then also victims that have experienced what we call child sex abuse imagery, which is child pornography, right? So my youngest victim is 8, my oldest is 17. The 8-year-old's victimization started when she was 6. So I've had every single age in between. And so first I want to say that, like, as far as stats, 9 times out of 10, the alleged offender is someone that the child knows. A lot of people think that child abuse happens with strangers or, child sex assaults happen with strangers. 9 times out of 10, it is someone that the child knows. And so due to that, like, they may not be wanting to report, right? And so that may mean, oh, I'm going to tell on someone that loves me, that cares for me, that's the caretaker, right? And so it could be a teacher, it could be a coach, it could be a mentor, it could be anything. I was a tutor at Sylvan Learning Center for about 7 years before I started working at the Baltimore Child Abuse Center. I have had to make a report of child abuse when I was 19 years old. And so I know how that feels. I know what it's like to teach a kid and then, you get that feeling that something's just wrong. So one thing that I also want to say as far as like reporting, as far as kids, is that it's a lot of guilt and shame associated with it. They may not even realize that they're a victim, because if this is the norm to them, because what's going to be the norm to them is not what's going to be the norm to you. if it's something that's ongoing, if it's something that is passed down from generation to generation, and I'm not talking about discipline, by the way, physical discipline is legal in the state of Maryland as long as it does not leave a mark. So some people say, oh, I hit my kid, I disciplined my kid, am I gonna get in trouble? I'm like, as long as it doesn't leave a mark, you're fine. Or a broken bone. And so with that, you know, your norm may not be their norm. And so understanding them and then meeting them where they are, and then also understanding that once you do make the report, the child is interviewed by a forensically trained social worker at a child advocacy center, and they're in therapy. Healing is not linear. So they may have a really good day today, and then tomorrow they may not. Next week they may not. Next year they may not. And so I think helping them to understand, to have patience with themselves as well. I can say that from the National Children's Alliance, 25% of cases that are reported come from teachers, right? So it comes from you guys. So I've had so many people ask me, oh, well, like, I don't really know if it's child abuse, like, what do I do to report it? That's not your job to investigate. That is a job of CPS. I'd rather you report and have it be nothing versus not report and have it be something and further subject that child to further victimization. So I think that that's really key too. Brandi, I can send you a list of like physical and physiological like triggers and signs that something is going on. One is sweaty palms, right? One is sweating palms, fidgeting. Fidgeting is, I fidget, I'm 25, I fidget all the time. But for kids, excessive fidgeting, like not to say, and like maybe like they're just, maybe like they have like too much chocolate or too much candy. They're just like, you know, but like excessive worrying. If they're in a room, I know that you guys are going to be teaching virtually in like a couple of weeks. If they're in a room and they're constantly looking over their shoulder, and then you're like, oh, hey, like little Sally, like what's going on? Oh, nothing. And so I think that having that unexplained injuries, if you are seeing constant cuts or scrapes or anything like that, also sexual abuse is not as easy to see, right? And so if a kid is like, oh, you know, I got no sleep that night, well, maybe they were up worrying, right? Also, chances are their abuser is going to be in the home with them. So if you guys can develop some, and I'm not sure if this was touched on, actually I had to mute you guys for a second because one of my victims called me. But if you guys could come up with some like nonverbal communication, even if it is just like putting it in the chat and kind of having like, all right, first day, like we're gonna have some nonverbal cues. And like, what does that look like? You want to put it in the chat, what does that look like? Like if you do feel unsafe and uncomfortable, and just being like, hey, like sometimes I just feel weird and like I may not want my kids or my spouse or my partner to know, like kind of make it normal for you too. That way, like they're not like, oh, like Miss Brandi knows, you know what I mean? Because then that's gonna make them clam up because they're gonna feel shame and get associated with that too. Because the body, so for sexual abuse, the body also responds in a natural way. And kids may be like, oh, well, it's my fault. Like I got an erection, like it's my fault. Instead of it being like, no, like the body's gonna respond how it's gonna respond if it's gonna be touched in a certain way. So helping them understand all of that. Some more like physical signs or symptoms could be anything from not sleeping to fidgeting to constantly like worrying or, you know, just anything. Also, beware of certain tattoos, certain brands, just anything just from a child trafficking perspective. That is something that traffickers and traffickers use to like label their victims as well. So if you are noticing that like somewhere in your school that they have the same stripe in their hair, or oh, thank you guys, clapping. Yeah, I'm trying. We're trying. But it, like if you guys are just like noticing like trends, speak up and say something. Like the best thing that you can do is speak up. The worst, silence is a response. Silence is complicity, right? And so as far as like, I know you guys were like talking about trauma and stuff in the classrooms and like how to like let teachers know. In the state of Maryland, there is a Handle with Care program. I'm not sure like how far it is along, but I know that it's in every jurisdiction and it's backed by Governor Hogan. It basically is where each city and county have a handle with care coordinator, and they just let the kids know like within 24 hours of any traumatic event happening, hey, handle them with care. So if they seem drowsy today, or they seem antsy or fidgety, or something's just off, that means that something happened without necessarily telling the kids whole business. Also, child advocacy centers are a great resource. I work for Baltimore Child Abuse Center. It's Baltimore Cities. I'm not sure if they're people from DC, but Safe Shores is another nonprofit. That's DC's Child Advocacy Center. So I'm trying to go fast. I hope what I'm saying makes sense and that it's like helpful, but.
It is, and I just want to say thank you so much. I just happened to look at the time, and as always, we have had the dopest conversation. I mean, I just want to say thank you to everyone. And if you have not already, please put your email information in the chat. So if people have questions, they can reach out to you directly as well. And just lastly, I'm just going to ask our panelists, give us a real quick 30-second takeaway from what teachers can take away from this experience today, as far as being able to just help these kids while they're having trauma in a virtual classroom. So I'm gonna start with Sonia, and then I'm gonna just call on everybody like a round robin. And like I said, try to keep it like 30 seconds. I know that's short, but you know, it's getting late. Sonia.
Okay, 30 seconds. I would definitely say one of the biggest pieces that I would say to take away in strategy wise is to remember to take off your teacher hat sometime and make sure to keep on your human hat, just so you can be able to recognize the things that are going on with your students and with yourself. Because like somebody mentioned, you need to make sure that you're also taking care of yourself. Secondary trauma is a thing. So take off your teacher hat from time to time.
Valerie.
I'm sorry. Call DSS if you need help. Some people cannot handle it. You sometimes if you, I agree 100%, take off your teacher hat. But if you want to keep that thing on and call the DSS, please do so. Call BCRI, Baltimore Crisis Response as well. So they can really, because when you open up that can of worms, you gotta learn, you gotta know how to handle and catch all those worms at the same time. So if you can't, it's okay. Call someone that is their job to do that, because you rather call, like Jay said, you rather call and not have anything happen and have it be nothing than not call and have it be something.
Wesley.
I would say be encouraged, have patience, and be understanding that this is new for not just the educator, but it's new for the children, it's new for the parents, it's new for us as educators and as a community. So I would say be patient, be understanding, and make sure that you stay encouraged and stay connected with folk that can help you stay motivated through this actual season.
I'm going to go to Alex. Did I call on you?
Oh man,
Alex.
it's okay. I would definitely say to stay healthy, and however getting healthy looks like for you physically, mentally, emotionally. Build your network of supports, family, friends, coworkers, admin, research, and bounce ideas off of other people. Keep your lines of communication open for our scholars. Be consistent, be dedicated, and remember your why you do what you do.
Brandi, and then Dr. Scott.
Think outside the box. Look for the kid with no breaks. Try to be as open, communicate, be present, take the head off. To piggyback off of Valerie for my 30 seconds, call somebody that is trained if you cannot handle that, because that is what they are trained to do. Secondary trauma is real. Don't take it home with you, but do your best to be more than just the teacher.
Sorry. Lastly, Dr. Scott and Michaela.
I think what I think what Brandi said made a lot of sense. Hold on, kid, hold on. I think what she said made a lot of sense about not just being able to have some self-awareness. Being a teacher in person is stressful, so I imagine trying to manage a classroom online is stressful as well. So it's cloudy. It's just clouds. Being able to have some self-awareness. Like if you know that this isn't a good day or you know this isn't a good time, just being able to make sure that you do something for yourself so that you're not so wrapped up. Because at the end of the day, you're still be a servant to these kids, and you want to do your job to the best of your ability. But if you don't know you, then you can't really help anybody.
Thank you so much, everyone. I guess my takeaways is to breathe and to just enjoy the little moments, because this is about to be really stressful for everyone. I was just telling one of my friends that as a parent who works in mental health field, I'm tired, and I had to check myself a couple times because I almost spazzed on my own child, and I forgot everything that I was trained to do, because this is I almost did. I was like, oh my God. So then I had to call my village and I had to send her away for a couple weeks because it was too much for us. So just remember this, that little people don't understand this, and it's going to be a lot of, like I said, it's going to be an increase in abuse and an increase in trauma, because this is so new and it's so stressful and so exhausting. So I just want to thank everyone. I want to thank my amazing panelists. I want to thank Meredith for doing this and for trusting me to do it again, because this was an amazing experience and I can truly say I have enjoyed it. So if there's nothing else, I want to say thank you to everyone, and enjoy the rest of this day. Hopefully it stops raining, and hopefully, everyone reaches out, and we will see you all later.
See you guys.
Good.